So this is a challenging time for so many Australians. Now, the Reserve Bank statement was sobering. It said that they expect inflation to continue to go up, to peak at 8%. That's an increase on what they'd previously said. And they expect more interest rate increases to follow beyond today. That will exacerbate the pain for so many Australians. Now, interest rate decisions by the Reserve Bank are, of course, made by an independent Reserve Bank, as it should be, but they're made within the context of government policy. And the great disappointment for so many Australians is that what we didn't see from the government last week in the budget is a clear and comprehensive plan that can take pressure off inflation and can take pressure off interest rates. It was a missed opportunity. The Labor government has put up the white flag when it comes to interest rates and inflation, and Australians will pay the price for that. I've stood here now 6 times in a row since I became Shadow Treasurer, each time saying what we need from the government is a clear and comprehensive plan to take pressure off interest rates and inflation. And my hope, and I think many Australians' hope, was that we would see that in the budget. We clearly didn't. It was a missed opportunity. Happy to take questions.
Treasurer, just on that, I'm just wondering, when you say you want to see a comprehensive plan, what specifically would you like to see in that plan in terms of actual changes, policy? What would you like to see in the budget?
Well, you know, we've had a good debate, and there's an ongoing debate about whether to treat the symptoms or the source of this inflation and interest rate pressure. Unfortunately, the budget did neither. It did neither. Now, what we saw in the budget was a deficit that started at $32 billion and went to 51. They made the situation worse. It's the first time for many, many years that we've seen a government that failed to actually have as part of their fiscal strategy budget balance. Now, we've always had budget balance as a core part of our fiscal strategy, and it must be part of the fiscal strategy. But, you know, there were basic things that we suggested, and we've suggested over recent months, like getting more pensioners into the workforce, and they went with a half-baked version of that. We don't need a toxic industrial relations culture when we're trying to ensure that we have a strong economy and we take pressure off interest rates and inflation, and yet they're rushing that legislation through Parliament. So there's a number of things we've said in recent months that we would do differently, and we'll continue to do so.
Treasurer, what would be the impact of interest rate rises and house price increases on small businesses?
Yeah, the focus has tended to be on households, of course, but much of the pressure we're seeing right now is already on small businesses. And I've seen in recent weeks in my own electorate the pressure on farmers who have had to buy properties, buy farms next door to keep their farms sustainable, and they're going to pay a lot more in their interest bills, and they're deeply concerned about that. Just this morning I was talking to a business person in my electorate, a retailer, who's going to pay 3 times more from the middle of next year for electricity than they were paying on a contract that they negotiated when we were in government. Now, add to that rising interest rates, and this is a very painful time for someone in small business. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of concern, and a lot of real pressure on their businesses. That has the risk of putting Australians out of work, and that's exactly what we don't want to see. We want to see small businesses continuing to invest, continuing to employ, and continuing to prosper as they have in recent years.
Should Philip Lowe resign?
Look, as I said, the Reserve Bank is independent, and that's as it should be. And you know, there's no proposal from us to intervene in terms of what the Reserve Bank is doing. What we do need, though, is government policy that means there's less pressure on the Reserve Bank to raise interest rates, less pressure on inflation.
Yeah, okay. But the Reserve Bank has said it's doing this to cut inflation, but inflation's going up. They've done nothing.
Well, they've been raising interest rates. I tell you who hasn't done enough, and that's Jim Chalmers. I mean, to be in a position where we've got rising inflation and interest rates, and that he hasn't even got a plan to get back to budget balance. He's given up the ghost. I mean, he's put up the white flag here on having a balanced budget. Now, if you want to take pressure off interest rates and inflation, any economist will tell you, balance your budget. If governments don't balance their budget, then small businesses and households will have to. If governments don't balance their budgets, small businesses and households will have to take the pain.
Shouldn't
And
Taylor
that's
take
exactly what we
some
don't want to see.
responsibility for what he's saying?
Well, I tell you who needs to take responsibility. It's the government. I mean, we have we have an independent reserve. We have an independent reserve bank, and that's as it should be. But what we do here in this place seek to influence is government policy. And the problem with government policy right now, in the budget, was handed down just last week. An incredible missed opportunity. This could have been a chance to lay out a plan that said to Australians and said to the Reserve Bank, here's a government that knows where it's going, is taking pressure off inflation and interest rates, and is ensuring that Australians have all the appropriate support they need with lower interest rates and inflation than otherwise would have been the case, and yet we didn't see it. What an incredible missed opportunity. I mean, why bother having the budget? What was the point? I really don't understand it.
Mr. Taylor, given what the Reserve Bank is predicting,
The Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor there with his response to today's rate rise, and says the budget was a missed opportunity.